Ewan, let's talk about the game that IGN just gave 1 out of 10 to. I can't remember the last time that they went that low on something. But the game that's on everybody's lips and not in a great way right now is The Day Before. Something that I recently put in a list of various games that, it was just called 10 video games that definitely exist. Because I didn't believe in The Day Before. And now that it's finally come out, something released. And this is all kind of happening in real time. As we're recording this, we're doing the podcast, we're going to put this out as a news video as well. Various things are happening in regards to just how I'm going to use the word scam. A lot of people are the potential criminal activity, etc. that's been happening around this game. We'll see when all the chips finally land. But there's a lot of aspects to this, whether it be the volunteer workers that actually helped make the game across last year. They weren't paid. They were given cool rewards, participation certificates, and free codes instead.
I love cool rewards.
I know, especially when I'm making a game for someone else that they then get to cash in on. But yeah, it's worth sort of doing a very quick roundup on what the hell the Day Before is, and then I'll mention everything that we have to this point. But like I said, it is very much unfurling right now. The team behind the game, fantastic, F-fantastic.
You know, I'm just going to say, not to interject there, but no, it's very fitting that an unfinished game doesn't have a finished word as like the development title. It's like the first warning sign was there all along.
Yeah, they couldn't even get the title out of early access. It was
Who even needs the A?
Not them. It's definitely not a grade A studio. But yeah, so we had volunteer workers putting the thing together across last year. There used to be a video on the developers' YouTube channel talking about volunteer culture over at Fantastic, but their YouTube channel's now been purged along with their LinkedIn and along with their Discord as they attempt, and they've also put a post out saying that they can no longer continue as a game developer, saying that The Day Before didn't make enough money for them to continue, and they've had to shut down. Now it's only been 4 days, or it was 4 days when they first announced the closure since the game's announcement, or release date, sorry. So it's only been 4 days on the market. The thing is that right now Steam are offering refunds to everybody because it's not remotely the game that was advertised when it was first announced back in 2021. They announced it as an open world zombie survival MMO, and it kind of just looked like The Last of Us meets The Division. That it would be this big open space thing where you'd all interact with other players and you take on zombies, hordes of zombies with physics, and you have firefights inside different interiors. None of that stuff is in the game, but you're lucky to find one enemy every 20 minutes by the looks of it, and it's nowhere near the level of gameplay fidelity or rendering that was in those original teasers, which is leading a lot of people down the asset flip route, the idea that they would just buy the assets off the Unreal store, and you can buy various gameplay models off that store as well, like third-person shooting or a loot system or whatever, and then throw that stuff together as soon as possible or as quickly as possible to essentially cash in. That largely seems to be the case, but like I said, it's all kind of unfurling right now anyway, and as it stands right now, the amount of people that were playing at launch was 38,000 players, but it's come out that they had 200,000 sales. Right now there are over 90,000 refunds that have happened, and Steam have delisted they're listing the game, but you can't buy it anymore. It's now listed as being in early access, it was an early access review that IGN gave a 1 out of 10. But Steam are saying that you can get a refund even if you're outside of the 2-hour playtime window, which is their standard amount of time playing, which is another nefarious thing because in the version of The Day Before that has released, that game's intro is protracted and extremely long and full of conversations and full of little fetch quests. Go over here, talk to this character, go back and do this, go set up your settlement.
They're all named Chris.
Yeah, they're all just Wasteland Chris. But it wants you to just spend time in that opening bit. And if you, I was going to try and give them the benefit of the doubt. I can't right now. But, it feels like that thing where they want to make players waste time to get through that 2-hour window so they can keep the money. Right now, like I said, Steam are allowing refunds regardless. But the sheer amount of stuff that's been taken down is insane. Your quick thoughts before I keep going with this, because there's more comments from the developers themselves.
Yeah, so initial thoughts. Your use of the word purge earlier is hilarious because it makes it seem as if it's like some kind of Stalin-esque, like, political kind of like maneuver. It is just brazenly terrible. Like, yeah. I think there's a whole conversation we need to have here around, yet again, early access. We had these controversies before in the past, but the fact that this game was able to get so much publicity from, like the exclusive trailers from IGN, lots of YouTubers were hyping up this thing, basically like, wow, look at this thing, and it just kind of felt like everyone got caught up in the like the hysteria of like, oh wow,
well, you wanna
open world,
believe,
like,
right?
like
you
zombie
wanna
game. But we've been disappointed so many times over the years, Scott. You mentioned the Division earlier on before. That demo from Ubisoft, man. And the Division comparisons initially should have been setting everyone's alarm bells off, because that thing didn't live up to expectations. And yeah, like if this is legitimately, if there is some, you know, to give the guys, like the developers, the benefit of the doubt, if they did attempt to actually make a game here and their company has been destroyed as a result of making that game, then I'm really sorry for everyone involved in there. However, from where I'm sitting right now, it very much looks like a case of we put together a bunch of different fake demos to get people very, very excited. We blended together a few different genres that are in, you know, zombies are still the moment somehow, thanks to The Last of Us. You know, maybe we can do The Division properly. Everyone seemed to like The Division. And the end result is just kind of, it's shocking, and I just find it interesting that it was able to get so much publicity. And there's kind of a conversation I guess we need to have here about like when outlets kind of become exclusive spaces to premiere things, you know, that kind of the discussion on, you know, video game criticism, video game kind of publishing and marketing. Does a trailer, an exclusive trailer for the day before, and again, it's all the main onus here is on the developers for making something that, you know, isn't real. Like, let's be clear here. But at the same time, you know, what level of checks and balances and scrutiny needs to be in place for, you know, our big, you know, video game outlets and, like, you know, big YouTubers to basically have an exclusive trailer for this thing? Because the day before, no one would be talking about the day before if its trailer hadn't been picked up at, you know, by IGN, by different outlets, and then kind of like really just spammed everywhere by YouTubers who got very excited about it. It just feels like there needs to be a better level of scrutiny applied to this before we get it, because IGN is a huge platform, and this isn't me dunking on IGN either. Like, it's one of those things that you should be able to get an exclusive trailer from a game company for a game that actually exists, but at the same time, it feels like they've we've whipped up a hype machine here, and the end result is that a lot of people have been duped into buying a game, which hopefully they'll all get refunded for. But it's just not a great look all around, is it?
My thing is that it's such a black mark on the idea of trust in an industry that is already so smoke and mirrors. And it is also by design fundamentally not going to be, it's not going to be the vision that someone set out to draw or paint or conceptualize or describe for years into development anyway. Like, God of War 2018 only came together in the last few months of development. There was a whole story that Cory Barlog talked about when they showed Shuhei Yoshida, who's one of the top brass over at PlayStation, and he walked out of the demo because it was just not coming together very well and couldn't believe that's what they were doing and everything. More so related to some of the more sort of thematic choices for the more matured version of Kratos, but also Barlog talked about how the reality of game development, you know, things don't come together till the end. You would like to think that if a studio says, hey, we have this cool ambitious project and we have the money to be able to pay you to showcase it, they don't need to necessarily, in IGN's case, do a hands-on editorial for it, but trust should exist to some degree. Go, cool, that thing looks cool. We're assuming you're not pretending the assets that you've put together to be able to make that demo, that they are representative of what the game's going to be later on. And something like this, when it all comes down and it falls apart, just means that they'll be more apprehensive for potentially ambitious projects in the future. But is that the right thing that just needs to happen? Like, obviously the go-to examples are No Man's Sky, there's Cyberpunk 2077. Both those games turned themselves around, but they took years and years. They also took money up front, which was massively the wrong thing to do. People still paid for broken products. And I don't believe this is going to turn itself around. Like, you know, the response on the dev side.
There's no one left to turn it around.
No. Well, that's the thing, and it's also worth throwing in here. I said I had a little bit more to mention. That Fantastic themselves, before the game came out on December 4th, only 3 days before launch, put a statement out over on social media just saying, please don't accuse us of being scammers. We've worked on it for 5 years. The game's not an asset flip. It's not a scam, which ties in to the reality of over on Reddit, there's a user called Epic Story 1989 who's went through the laborious process of looking up every single asset in the game and comparing it to the Unreal Store, the Epic Store, and just listing all of the asset prices and saying this is how they literally paid for and made the game, complete with the dates that are associated with those assets when they were purchased, which all lines up with the last 2 to 3 years. It's not a 5-year dev cycle. In terms of, I mean, maybe there was a version of the game that was thrown out before then, whatever, but still, that overall idea of we're aiming for something, we're putting it together on the journalistic side, there should be a way to showcase the game ahead of time, because it fundamentally doesn't exist yet. It can only be an early version of it. But yeah, it's kind of on the developers. And also, the way the game was listed on Steam until recently, when it was taken down, was that it was still listed as an open world MMO, even though the reality of the game was more of an extraction shooter with very little AI implementation in regards to the zombies. And even the servers, you could pick a server to jump into, but if it was full, there was no like queuing system. There was just a whole thing where you couldn't actually get into the game anyway. So it just seems like a whole mess of volunteer employees who weren't paid, and the reality of, at least right now, it seems like the developers themselves, or whoever's at the top, attempting to get away with the money that they have made before everybody gets their refunds.
Yeah, and like there was that whole thing, I believe, either earlier this year or it was last year, when they were like, we've had to delay the game because someone's stolen the name for it or something as well.
Yeah.
It's just really, it's interesting how these games get picked up, because obviously, you know, we love indie games, love the idea of like, you know, something kind of generating success. It doesn't have to have like a massive publisher behind it. But it is interesting that like when this is the textbook example of what happens when like lots of attention falls on a smaller project and it ends up kind of spiraling into the worst thing ever.
Yeah.
Because in the best case scenario, these dudes were completely out of their depth and they made something, and then they panicked and gone blah, because they've had like so much interest or whatever. But the other, you know, the worst case scenario is that they've tried to like deceive people and dupe people into buying something. Either way, it's another hilariously bad release in 2023. You know, after we've had stuff like Cog Skull Island, Lord of the Rings Gollum, Redfall, like it's just not very good. And again, like, it all comes down to me, like, that you know, YouTube and like, you know, is a great space for games to, you know, for indie games to get, you know, the name out there, for people to get interested in them. But this to me is like a really good example of like the negative effects of that, when there is like zero scrutiny applied to these gameplay trailers. I mean, there was scrutiny. People were skeptical of the game when it was first released, revealed, when people were like, you know, oh, this doesn't look real. Remember Watch Dogs, remember The Division, remember all this. So there is that level of scrutiny. It's just not coming from where these things are being hosted. And obviously now IGN have their 1 out of 10 review, you know, fair play. The game looks terrible. By all means do that. But it feels like there is something... It is kind of a weird situation for me, where again, like, it falls on the developers to make sure that this thing is real.
Yes.
But I'm also just kind of like, how did we get so caught up in this situation where a game like The Day Before, where I don't know, like, it's kind of just weird to me.
No, I think that's true. I think, like, if you're someone as big as IGN, you can argue that there should be a way of vetting the projects that you're showing off, and not necessarily just taking the money for the sponsorship deal. And that might not be as simplistic as it is. It likely isn't anyway. But still, like I said before, like, I think there is probably a way to put a version of the game together that just showcases a firefight in one location and says, look at this potential interior that will later be part of an open world, and that open world just never comes together, and, you know, years pass and things don't come together. All of this reminded me of Abandoned. Do you remember that from 2021?
Yes.
There's like the Silent Hill style game where you had lead creator Hassan Karaman was very much steering into all the Hideo Kojima Silent Hill comparisons, and then it was Kojima himself who had to get out there and just say, look, I have nothing to do with the project. It's not a secret Silent Hill game. But that thing got as far as getting an Abandoned trailer launcher on the PlayStation Store, where we could all download it. Everybody logged in at the same time to see the debut of what was supposed to be gameplay footage, and then it wasn't anything. It was the same teaser that had been shown, I think it was a month or two beforehand, and then Karaman had to get out there and say, look, I think his studio's called Blue Box Studios or Black Box Studios, and just say, oh, look, we've had some development issues, we're going to delay the game, we're getting there, and that thing's just slowly disappeared. The history of that particular studio, none of their games have actually ever come out. It was one of those things where they seem to always get a bunch of investor money and get a bit of buzz going. Abandoned was the one that took off the most, but they have a worse track record, at least right now, than Funtastic seem to, because Funtastic at least have Prop Night, and there's a game called Wild 8 that apparently is quite, well, it released anyway. So they have previous titles that are out there. The last thing in regards to Funtastic is that right now, like I said, we're recording this as many things are breaking, is that they've changed their name on the Steam database to 8 points. Now, they've only done that for one of their games. I mentioned Wild 8 just before. If you go on the Steam listing for Wild 8, the developer now says 8 points. So I wonder, and I guess all this will shake out over time, if they're changing their name.
You
to
think
try
this is
and
a
pivot.
Mr. Snrub situation?
Just a fantastic logo with a little mustache on. Just feel like it's not me at all. But yeah, they've got some other business going on in regards to why they would actually change their name and what associations that brings about if the fantastic name ends up being worth, less than mud.